Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just Chat with Uncle Dominic. Today, we'll be talking about something interesting, which is storytelling. I know all of you love storytelling, love stories, all kinds of stories. Well, I do too as well. But did you know that stories sometimes gives you great experiences that you never had, or can teach you some things that you have never experienced, so that we can learn it ourselves and improve our lives ourselves. So today, on our great storytelling experience, we'd like to invite Keeper to the show, and he will introduce himself and tell us more about him. So let's welcome Keeper. Hi,
Hi, Dominic.
Keeper.
How are you? Thank you for
Great.
having me on your show. It is an absolute honor to be here with Uncle Dominic.
Well, thank you, Keeper, for coming to the show. Well, today it's about storytelling. It's about your
Yeah,
story in particular.
yeah.
Can you
My
tell us a
my
little bit about
story,
yourself?
sure. My story centers around my book Helplessness, which is about the emotional health challenges brothers experience after we learn our sisters have been sexually abused, particularly by our parents. Now, I would say this to anyone listening or anyone watching: this is a very difficult topic, and it could be very triggering emotionally. And I'm sure Dominic would agree that if you find that it is becoming too much for you, then by all means, back away, protect yourself at all costs emotionally. If you get a chance to come back and listen to it later or watch it later, we are happy that you would do so. But understand this is a very difficult topic because it centers around child sexual abuse. Now, about my story, since it is about stories, I am a brother that comes from a family of 10, four boys, four girls, and my mother and stepfather. And my experience with this and my book centers around the perspective of a brother, what we go through once we learn our sisters have been sexually abused. Because all too often, when it is exposed, brothers are never asked, "Are you okay? Do you need to talk? Is there anything you need?" We are shunted to the side as if our feelings and emotions don't matter, but we go into a very dark, difficult place. Now, I will share with you how all of this came about for me and my brothers. In 1977, my family, we were singers in Los Angeles, incredibly popular. We were doing concerts, we were TV shows, we had made the coveted Billboard magazine's top 100 three times that year. And we had started singing 6 years prior in 1971. And the significance of that is this: in 1971, when we were singing and learning how to do our craft, incredibly poor. I went to 11 grade schools before I graduated high school. I lived in 21 different places. I was homeless three times, and singing was our way out of abject poverty. So one afternoon while we were singing on a Saturday, the phone rings. And at this time, we were starting to gain some traction. We were starting to become pretty popular in Los Angeles. And when the phone rings, my mother says, "Hello? Who?" And she looks at her eight kids and says, "Shh, Michael Jackson's on the phone." It's like, "Yeah, that Michael Jackson." She then says to the brother below me, "He wants to talk to you." My brother gets on the phone and hangs up a couple of minutes later and screams, "Michael Jackson said he's heard of us. Says for us to keep going, for us to just keep going. We will make it someday." Jump back to 1977 when all this is really just blasting off for us. Motown Records had lost to Jackson 5 3 years earlier to Epic Records. And after an exhaustive 3 year search, Motown picked my family to replace Michael Jackson and Jackson 5 at Motown. Our dreams of fortune, our dreams of no longer being in poverty, all that was about to be wiped away. The Saturday before the Thursday or Friday we were to sign the contract, my sister screams upstairs. I'm number two in the pecking order. I have an older brother, there's me, then there's my first sister. This older sister screams upstairs, "Boys, come downstairs, family meeting." We all come running downstairs because we figure we are about to learn which day, Thursday or Friday, that we are about to sign the largest new artist contract Motown Records had offered anyone. We were with United Artists at the time, so they were about to pluck us from them because they wanted us to be their new supergroup. They had created the TV show. In fact, I even have the pilot script in my office for the first episode called At Wit's End, a play on the Whitney family, which is what our name was, At Wit's End. We come downstairs. And when I entered the room, my three youngest sisters are already sitting on the couch, but they're not saying a word. They are silent, which is really odd because they always were laughing and joking. My oldest sister was pacing the archway coming into the living room, and she's angry, and I don't know why. But it wasn't really all that odd, Dominic, because she was always, could always have something going on between her and my mom. So it's like, okay, but this is supposed to be a really happy meeting. What's going on here?
Mm.
My three other brothers were already in the living room, and they were like me. What the hell? Why is everyone so gloomy? What's going on here? Now, earlier that day, my sisters were talking in secret with each other. We could hear them going into a closet, hear them going into a bathroom and talking, and they were like agitated bees. They were just, something was going on, but okay, I have no idea. The girls are tripping. What are they doing?
Mm.
We are about to find out, me and my brothers. I go in the living room and I sit down on the couch. Within seconds, my mother and stepfather enter the living room. My stepfather immediately bends down after sitting on a chair and puts his hands on his face like this. And I'm like, what? What's about to happen here? My mother, who is usually very bubbly, very effervescent, walks to the front of the room. And she scans the room, very stoic, angry. Me and my brothers have no idea. We don't have a clue what is happening because we're about to hear our lives are about to change forever. Yeah, I mean, we were about to go from here to here like that. I like to say the bus was outside the house, the door was open, the engine was running. All we had to do was step onto the bus and we were gone. Motown had already made the commitment, mega $1 million commitment to us. My mother looks around at her 8 children and she says the words no brother ever expects to hear. The words no brother could ever prepare for. Me and my 4 brothers are about to be hit with 3 major emotional earthquakes. The first one being that my mother looks around, locks on me and my 3 brothers, and says, your stepfather has been molesting your sisters for years. What did you just say? What are you talking about? Dominic,
Mm.
we are suddenly hit with major PTSD. We are tumbling down. Our world is crashing around us. What is going on? And all I remember hearing are little snippets: liquor store, apartment, park. And I'm just like, I'm not comprehending. It's not all coming together. Now, I'm 16 years old. Me and my siblings were all 8 years apart. But all we did was sing, go to school, go to bed, and repeat. That's what we did because we were so focused on getting out of South Central Los Angeles. We did not want to be around the gang banging and the drugs and the prostitution. We wanted out. And that is all we did. But now we were just told, me and my 3 brothers, that our stepfather has been molesting our sisters for years. That's earthquake number 1 in a 10-minute span. Next, my mother says, I have known all along. no,
Hmm.
Jesus, no, no, no. What are you talking about? So I'm a brother, and I am not able to put anything together. Emotionally, I'm breaking, I'm falling apart, I'm tumbling down this void into this abyss, and there's nothing to slow me down. There's nothing to arrest the descent. I am just tumbling, as are my three other brothers. We are known for our earthquakes in California, particularly Southern California. Houses break, bridges crumble. These are physical earthquakes. But when you are hit with an emotional earthquake, it is very difficult to come back from anything like that. We are kids. Adults can't handle this news. How are 8 kids supposed to handle it? Even better, how are 4 brothers supposed to handle it? Because my sisters already know what's about to happen before we even enter the room, because that's what they were discussing. They were discussing whether or not that day was the day to tell us 4 boys. And of course, my sisters already knew because they were the ones being molested. So they already knew what was going on. For them, it was just a matter, do we tell them before we do this deal, or do we tell them because now is the time that they know? Well, they had decided that morning that's what they had been talking about. Today was that day. So we are hit with our first 2 earthquakes, our stepfather and then my mother. And as difficult as all of that news was, Dominic, the most devastating news for me and my brothers was about to be dropped on us. When brothers hear something like this, we are never asked, as I said, are you okay? Do you need to talk? Do you need anything? We are shunted to the side. And what is about to be said next confirms all of that. My oldest sister, who was pacing back and forth, stopped and turned around and pointed at her 4 brothers and said, you can't talk about it. It didn't happen to you. It only happened to us girls. You can't talk about it ever. And like that, relationships between brothers and sisters that were so tight lay on the living room floor, broken, shattered. If you're a brother and you're hit with this, what do? There's no place for you to go. There's little conversation, if any, and certainly in 1977, about the impact on brothers emotionally, the trauma that we go through, the guilt and the shame that we experienced. And granted, in 1977, you could go to a library and you could find a book by a woman who has told her stories, and you could find articles. There were movies out that were discussing sexual abuse for women and even sexual abuse for girls. There were documentaries. Those things were around. Nothing like the proliferation of them today. I mean, they're everywhere today. There are billions of articles from around the world on the subject. But what you don't find are conversations about the brothers. You'll find conversations about the predator. You'll find conversations about the enablers of the predator. But when it happens in families, the one group who is always left out of the conversation, trying to handle all of this emotional baggage and now being told you cannot participate in the conversation, but then being expected to answer for your non participation, we are totally lost. And that became a 45-year journey for me to try to figure out, how do I deal with this? How do I get to my sisters? How do I heal? How do I just understand who I am as a man? Because you start to think, how could you not know? How is it even possible in your house that something like this is happening and you not even be aware of it? But when my sister said what she said, it took me a while to understand what she was doing. And what I understood later was that she was protecting herself and my 3 youngest sisters, who are the 3 youngest of all 8 of us. That's what she that's what she was doing. But in doing so, my brothers and I were shut out of the most important conversation of our lives. And when you don't have support systems and tools in place, the men that we would grow to become would be directly related to the help we do or do not get. Two of my brothers are still struggling mighty with this. Me, my older brother and I have been able to get back in touch with our sisters and create relationships, but the struggle within us from the guilt and the shame and even ultimately the betrayal, because we're trying to figure out what to do but being told you can't do something. So that in and of itself feels like betrayal because you want to talk to them, but you're asked to just keep on going, to just live your life as if nothing happened. Brothers are not an inconvenient truth. We are not taboo. We are part of the family. We are part of the conversation that belongs in child sexual abuse. So my book focuses on that, and it is a brother story. And one of the more interesting aspects of this book that took me 10 years to write is three of my sisters actually contribute to the book. Two of my brothers contribute to the book. So at the end of 45 years, you get a family that has figured out ways, figured out tools to help them come back together. And then they start to participate in telling the story. It is my story. It is from a brother's perspective, and it is possibly the very first story on the subject as it relates to the impact on brothers. So that is the framework for our conversation.
Thank you, Keeper, for this story. I bet it's pretty hard to share this experience. It's hard to
Well,
recite, but yeah. So it gets me wondering as well. People nowadays, there are so many ways and things, and people still do these brutal things or bad things for some reason. It's just I have no idea what is going on in their heads. I mean, well, yeah. So for yeah. Hmm. It also puzzles me in a way, back in the early days where when these things do happen, people tend to hide away from this and not share the experiences compared to what's going on in the world right now where there's Me Too movement and all kinds of stuff where people tend to get together and they share. And so for me to understand what people did before in the early years, it's a bit difficult because I never experienced it and do not understand why do people want to keep it hidden. Especially for me, if there's something bad that's happened to me, I would like to share it out or get my information out to protect myself. But I guess in those days it's a little bit different, right?
well, not only in those days, but also oftentimes, I mean, it depends on the topic. This is a very sensitive, very
Yeah.
difficult topic for people to not only accept for themselves, but then to be vulnerable enough to share something like this, even with our closest friends and family. For instance, me and my brothers, after learning of what happened, we did not talk about it amongst ourselves. It wasn't something that we ever discussed,
Mm,
primarily because we took what our sister said to heart. It was a command, it was a demand not to do it, even though we were victimized. As soon as we knew, we became victims. In fact, even when we didn't know about it, the energy within the house, it would began to explain some things, some reactions from our sister. So even when you don't know what's happening, something like this in your house,
mm,
you are victimized. So it was much more difficult 40, 50 years ago because during that time, it was the belief whatever happens in the house stays in the house. It's
mm,
like the old commercial whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
mm.
That is it. Today, it is become easier because we're now finding, particularly for men, more and more celebrities are coming out talking about their personal, direct experience with sexual abuse as a man or as a child. So we're finding more and more men come out and talk about this, which is also, as you said, it is making it easier, not just the Me Too movement. Women have always had a much better handle on this emotionally than men. One of the things, because women have had a better handle on it, they control the narrative of who talks, when they can talk, how they can talk, especially as it relates to men. But now we're seeing more and more discussions of men saying, you know what, I'm coming out about this. I will say this, I understand both sides of the child sexual abuse coin, is how I like to phrase it. Because 6 years prior to my sisters, my older brother and I, we were sexually abused by our babysitter almost daily for 6 months. So I understand what it's like to be the victim. And I
Uh-huh.
also understand to be the collateral victim with my sisters. So I can speak on both sides of this. It's not something that I'm proud to say, but it is what it is. And it does give me the ability to communicate with just about anyone or any gender on this topic, because I could say, yeah, I understand. Because oftentimes during my talks, I do a lot of speaking on this. One of the first things that women will say to me is, you don't understand. Well, you're our brother and your sister's right. It didn't happen to you, even though it did, but in a different way. But then when I say, well, 6 years before my sisters, I was sexually abused by our babysitter for 6 months. And then it's like, oh, you do understand. And so I could bring a perspective that most people can't, particularly men, because, like I said, I have my own direct and I also have my sisters. So it's not an easy thing for someone to admit. Even the strongest people,
Mm.
have difficulty handling this conversation. Now, if adults can't handle it, how are a bunch of kids supposed to handle it? And therein lied the problem for us. I'm a brother, and I'm being told to keep this dark secret to yourself. And as the years go by, it just festers like a boil underneath the surface, and you get angry. You wonder who you are as you get older, what type of man you are, what kind of brother you are. You must do something, you must say something, you must protect their honor in some way, somehow. And mine finally reached its boiling point 9 years later in 1986. So the question becomes, what do brothers do? And how do we move forward after we learn something like this?
Man, I I think also the main problem is society sometimes as well. Like when people are being victimized, in the end, they're the ones who are being afraid of a lot of things. So if even if they come out and tell people what happened to them, like sexual abuse or whatever, they end up becoming the victim as well. They will say, oh, it's because of you is the way you wear your clothes, is the way how you talk to people, and so you are the one who starts it. And then recently, this is in Taiwan as well. Like celebrities are coming out recently and talking about how this famous guy actors or guy hosts abusing women, sexual assault them. Uh, One of them actually said, and she was pretty young at that time. She came out and tell people in her school that time that she was involved with this celebrity and stuff like that, and he's been taking advantage of him. But all her friends were like, we don't believe you. It's like, well, some of them would say, oh, it's because the way you talk to guys or things like that, and you are the cause of it. But in reality, society should be more like, you know, if we come out and tell people what happened to us, there should be more willing to help instead of shaming us. I
Yeah,
guess
yeah,
that's sort of what happened when your sisters or you weren't able to share the experience or are not able to say things out, because if you do, it's going to bring shame on your family or things like that, and you might not even have that Motown contract. By the way, did you guys ever get it, or did you guys sign it?
Oh, oh no, no, oh no! Everything came to a halt. Everything stopped, as it should. You know, imagine trying to go forward, uh, knowing that that has been taking place. The immediate reaction in the aftermath of what we heard had to be for each of us, 8 kids, is how do we handle this?
Mm.
Certainly for me and my brothers, the inability to process correctively what we just heard was devastating because the people that we would typically go to for help,
Mm.
our parents, were the ones committing all the crimes, were the ones doing all the molestations in our house. So at that point, where do you go? Who do you talk to? Sure, we went to some aunts and uncles, and their immediate reaction was, well, um, I don't want to get involved.
Yeah, see?
So just by them saying that, they automatically became
Part of it.
part of my father and my stepmother's and my mother's protective detail. They automatically became part of the group that was protecting the people committing the molestations. And even as we, for instance, we told our manager, my sister did, and we told other people, and no one wanted to help because even back then, that was not something you typically did. You didn't typically get involved in other families' business. But here we're talking about children, and yet no one wanted to help. For my aunts and uncles, they were more interested in us potentially becoming famous so they could potentially take advantage of that or certainly be a part of it. But where do you go? I still come back to the thing for brothers. Where do we go? Because there are no books, there are no documentaries, there are no movies, there are no interviews, there are no tools and systems in place for us. And certainly here in the United States, there are some 44 million adults walking around every day who have been abused sexually in one way or another, either as children or as adults. And those are the ones that have been reported. The situation with child sexual abuse, Dominic, it crosses age lines, it crosses religious lines, it crosses education, it crosses wealth, it crosses political lines, it crosses waters, it crosses borders. It is a global epidemic because we as a society have yet to figure out a way to get involved with it because we are so busy protecting those people in power that we leave behind the children who have been devastated, whose lives have are trying to be managed by someone very young or someone who just has grown into and carrying the burden, trying to figure out how do they go forward. It is a very difficult task.
It's difficult indeed because there's no one to talk to. And
No, there you're absolutely right. And if you're talking about what are the steps that it takes to begin to heal, there are three major things that we need to understand right away. Number one, especially for brothers and especially for men, we need to accept the fact that we are victims. Because unless we can accept that, we cannot step into the survivor mode and taking those necessary steps to heal. We need to understand we are victimized. And this is part of our DNA now. It is a part of who we are. And like DNA, which can be self replicating, it comes with things developing within you emotionally that you might not be aware of that impacts relationships with your sisters and with your female friends and family. You have these issues that could be anger driven. You could have these issues that center around fear and doubt and self-esteem and self-worth, not knowing that the genesis is because of what you have just learned about your sexual abuse. So until you are able to understand what that is, and in fact, it took me 40 years to recognize that I was a victim. I was in bed one night writing helplessness, And I was telling my wife about it, and she says to me, "You know, you're a victim." And I said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Of course you're a victim. Look at you." I'm like, "Well, I'm just telling you, what section of the book I'm writing and how it's going and how difficult it is." She says, "Look at you. You're sweating. You're shaking. You're an absolute mess. How could you not know you were a victim all this time?" And then it hit me. What? I'm a victim? I can't be. And this is after being sexually abused by my babysitter. And yet here I am, a grown man in my 50s. And I still had yet to accept the fact that I was a victim of sexual abuse. And that can be so difficult for men because it requires that we be vulnerable. And if we aren't willing to do that, other things that could come out of the manifestation is toxic masculinity.
Mm.
We run into those things and those health and mental health challenges. So after you've gone through the acceptance, because without acceptance, healing can't even begin, and you recognize that it is a part of you always from this point on, you can't just pick it up and throw it in the trash and move on. That's not going to happen. You have to begin to, like you said, find people, particularly that very first person that you could share your story with.
Mm.
You've got to get out of your head and share it with someone who will not judge you, but allow you to just speak. And then your road to healing really begins to take place, really begins to formulate in front of you.
Um, just recently, a couple of days, my son was, it was around 1 o'clock in the morning, and my son was bawling out, and he was, screaming or whatever in his room. My wife came out to the room first, um, trying to get him to open the door. Eventually, my wife woke me up, and I went up, and then I saw him, my son, and then first thing I was wondering, did he have a bad dream, and is everything okay? And try to talk him down and calming him down, and trying to figure out what happened to him. You know, uh, he's a teenager, he's a high schooler, and so probably things that goes into my mind is probably like saying maybe he got bullied or something bad happened in school, you know, um, or some friends did something to him or something like that. So eventually, he stopped crying and he started talking about it. And he said it's hard, it's hard as a boy, and trying to take control of a lot of things and responsibility and stuff like that. And he says his friends, don't like him, or or they say something mean things to him, even though he didn't do anything bad to them. He was just trying to help. And I told him in right there and there, uh, there are people like that in the world. There are people who don't really care about you, and sometimes you have nowhere to go to. But I told him, you have us, we are here. And I understand in your situation, you have no parents to go to, and that is tough. But for listeners out there, most of the times, if you have, you know, your parents to go to, you should. Or if you don't, right now in most of the schools, and well, actually all the schools in Taiwan, they have counselors there waiting to help you if you are in need of help, if you reach any problems like this. Now, for my son, he didn't take advantage of the counselor. He just kept it into his heart, and then it blew up. And luckily, we were there as parents to help him, to calm him down, to understand what's going through with him, and actually to help him to see things a little bit differently, and hopefully it changes his life. But I'm sorry for the fact for you, keeper. In those days, you don't have any of these abilities or these functions to help you in those days. And it's kind of hard to keep all these things for 40 plus years. It's tough. It is tough.
You know, Dominic, one of the things that came out of it was in getting back and connected with my sisters. I went to each of them and I told them, I'm going to write a book from a brother's perspective. about what happens to us once we learn our sisters have been sexually abused by our parents. See, I focus on that, not just on child sexual abuse, but when it happens that your parents are the ones abusing you. And I went to them and I was expecting this tremendous anger
Mm,
from them to say, "Don't you dare, how dare you?" But the fact of the matter is, it is my story. And so I'm going to write the story. I just wanted them to know this was coming. But to the three that contributed to the book, and they will contribute to my book, Hopefulness, and they will contribute to my book, Happiness. Each of them said, "Of course you should write a book,"
mm,
which really shocked me because for years they were told me that I couldn't talk to them, but they began to understand as they grew as people and the evolution and understanding of tolerance that my brothers have somehow been victimized too. So when I told them, they each said, "You should write it. Of course, you should write it so that other men will read it and know that they are not alone. They're not the only ones feeling what you're feeling. And so that sisters will know this is what your brothers have been carrying all this time."
mm,
Because all too often in this conversation, brothers and sisters are enemies. And me and my brothers, we became instant enemies simply because of what is between our legs is what was between the legs of their sexual predator. So that automatically made us enemies to our sisters. So for sisters who are listening and watching this, and you think your brothers are okay, chances are they are not okay. They
mm.
need to have a conversation. They need an ability to express what they are going through. And so one of the things that has to happen are these really tough conversations, but the brothers were always looking for an opportunity, but chances are we're not going to take the first step. It is not going to happen because we don't know how to approach you. And
It's
so we need your help.
for guys, we keep our emotions so good sometimes, and it's just hard to express it, and like you said, toxic masculinity. So we have it. We cannot share it out. We're afraid that people will shun us and people will look at us as weakness.
Exactly.
There is a song that I liked. It's by Dax. I don't know if you know Dax. He wrote
Mhm.
recently. He said, "To be a man," and that lyrics in the song resonate right now. It feels like because we all keep all the problems to ourselves sometimes as a man, and we don't know how to express it, or we don't know how to share it. It's difficult. Even my dad, for example, my dad, he has so much problems, but to me, whenever I see him, he is his there's nothing wrong with him. He's always, perfect. He's always happy. But as I grew older and he passed on, and I learned more about his life, and I realized there's a lot of things going on in him, and he never shared any of that to me, and so I
Yeah.
never know the things that he experienced until he passes. So I feel like, oh no. And then now I'm feeling certain things or certain experiences that is the same happening to me as well. And there's no one for me to go to share it with. And it's difficult.
Hmm.
But in your case, it's even more because it's the seriousness of sexual abuse. And
Right.
it's tough. It is tough.
Right.
But
I yeah, go. I had said earlier that this conversation and what I'm doing is elevating the voices of brothers. I'm bringing brothers into a conversation where we are usually not invited to. My father-in-law passed away about 5 years ago, and my father-in-law is white. He's Jewish, and he comes from a middle-class family. I'm black. I grew up Baptist and incredibly poor. We could not be more polar opposites, but we became very good friends. A few years before he passed, he read my book, Helplessness, and I didn't know he was reading it, but he got it and he read it. And one afternoon, he called me and asked me to come to the house. He said, "I want to talk to you." I'm like, "Okay, I'm coming over, Dad. I'll be over in a little bit." And I had no idea what he wanted to talk about. I completely clueless. But he wanted to talk, so not a problem. So I go over to the house, and he's sitting at the dining room table, and my book is on the table in front of him. And I'm okay. That's interesting. I sit down and I said, "Okay, everything all right?" He said, "Yeah." "I want to tell you that I just finished your book." "Oh, okay." He's in his 90s, Dominic, when we're having this conversation. He says to me, "I'm going to tell you something I have never told anyone but my wife, but your mother in law." "Okay." He says, "I understand exactly what you're going through. I understand exactly what you are talking about in your book." I said, "Okay." He said, "Let me finish." "All right." He said, "When I was a young teenager, we lived in an apartment building and we were on the first floor. There was a husband and wife on the second floor, and we were very good friends with them, my family. And I'm wondering, where is this going? How could he possibly understand my story? Like I said, we are so polar opposites. Nothing about our life is the same. And he says, one day, my parents asked me to find my sister. So I went upstairs because she visited them a lot. She was always up there. And I went upstairs to the apartment. The door was unlocked, and I went in. And I found this man molesting my sister. He said, "I did not know what to do. I was scared. I did not know what to do. I got my sister out of there and went downstairs and we did not tell anyone." But what I realized was that I didn't do anything. And there was shame and pain and guilt and this sense of betrayal that I have been carrying for over 70 years. And I've not shared it with anyone but my wife. And I wanted to share it with you because I needed to talk about it to someone. Now imagine that. He's white, he's Jewish, he's in his 90s. This happened when he was a teenager, and he's carrying all of this pain and all of this shame, even when he is 90 years old and he still wants to talk. He still wants to share it with someone. So, of course, he understood exactly what I was talking about in this book. That brought us even closer together. He died about 5 years later, but it really connected us even to a much greater degree, which is why I said this thing crosses racial lines, it crosses religion, it crosses wealth, it crosses education, it crosses countries, it's everywhere. And there's so many men who want to talk. And so I have shared my experience with my son and my daughters at a very early age because I wanted them to know who their father is. And I want them to know what my experience is. I also want them to know if something like this happens around them, how they might handle it. So when you tell me about your experience with your son and what's going on with him at school, it is an opportunity for fathers and sons to have much greater conversation. But the challenge is this: who speaks first? You know, who's willing to open up first? And I looked at it; it was my responsibility to open up to my son first, because I've been setting the example of this is what you do when you have children. I told my daughter the story so that she knew this is what happened. This is how you handle these very difficult conversations. And with my book on my website, my podcast, where we did a 16-part episode, I'm interviewed by my son. And it's one of the most difficult interviews I've ever had to participate in. He's hitting me with all these questions. And then shortly thereafter, me and my older brother spoke to one of our sisters for the first time in 45 years. It is a it is such a conversation, but it required us as brothers to just sit back and listen. So at the end of the day, as you are with your son, someone has to speak first.
Hmm.
Otherwise, no one can heal and nothing can come of it. You just take it all in, and it becomes darker and darker and heavier and heavier.
That's right. I actually told him as well, it's okay to cry. Even you're a boy, it's okay to cry. We all need to find an output in life. And I told him before what my output was and how I found it. And then maybe his output was that's I mean playing the piano. He loves playing the piano, and I'm guessing. And I told him that could be your output. That's maybe where you express your emotions. Everyone needs to let go. And he says, "See,
Hmm.
crying, but I'm a boy." I say, "Yeah. Have you seen me cry?" It's like, yes. It's like, well, there you go. So I'm a grown man, but I still cry. But sometimes
Yeah,
I don't cry in front of you. I will be crying elsewhere, but I cry. It's just a way to let go. There's no place to talk, no one to talk to. There's nothing. We should just cry. I mean, it's okay for guys to cry, and I tell my
absolutely.
students that as well. When we comes to emotions, whatever, we need to open up and share it. It's not doesn't mean if we open our emotion as a guy, we're weaker or more feminine. It doesn't mean that. It just means that we need to let go. Everyone needs to let go. We have to
Yeah.
find an output to let go.
Well, I think men and women, we all have our feminine and masculine side about us.
Mm,
And so there's just always this constant balancing act of what's going to be out front the most. But we all have this energy in us. And as you're saying, the ability to cry is great. It becomes even greater when your kids can see you cry, especially if you're talking about a father and a son. My son has seen me cry a lot, and a lot of it centers around this experience in the book and what we're talking about now. But what it gives him is this strength of knowing it's okay for him to cry if he wants to. And now that he has a son that's 2 months old, hopefully he will be able to pass that exchange to his son as well, because that's, as men, that's how we begin to understand ourselves even better, is just being vulnerable, and at times being vulnerable in public to our loved ones, so they could see that it is okay, like you're talking about, Dominic, and telling your son it's okay.
mm.
Part of being a man is expressing yourself like this. It is all right. Otherwise, you get into some very difficult personality issues because you're unwilling to share who you really are.
That's right. It is true. Well, thank you, Keeper, for coming onto the show and sharing this such emotional and also a tough, tough. It's tough to share these kind of stories. I applaud you and thank you for coming to the show and writing this incredible book to help brothers out there, to anyone, all the guys who are finding problems. This book will help them to the first start to leap towards it or to express themselves. It is great. I do want to know. It's been bugging in my mind. Like I'm the kind of guy that if there is a question out there, I need to find an answer to it. What actually happens to your parents after that? Did you guys ever reported it, or it just stays the same?
The end of the story is in great cinematic detail in my book. But what I will
Okay,
tell you is
I wish
this:
you
I
gave
will
more
give
info.
you,
Yeah.
right. I don't have any conversation with my mother, none at all. But I was able to bring some closure for my sisters in 2021
Mm.
when my stepfather, who had a Facebook page, rather of all things, announced that he was having a celebration of life for his then wife. Well, the church that he was having it at was 10 minutes from where I lived. So I decided to go. And I figured if you would put the announcement on Facebook, you invited the world. And I'm part of the world, so I'm going. So ultimately, I went to the service. The service did what it did for 90 minutes. And after the service was done, I took over the church for my own 90 minutes. And it is glorious what I did. Uh, he was mine, and the entire church watched me do what I was sent there to do, to handle it. And after I handled it, I called my sisters and said I did it. I found him. I did this. And I want you to know that your brother, I'm a brother who would not let it go, that was going to complete the mission, because there were many would have, should have, could have moments during
Mm.
those 45 years that I did not. But I closed it and I brought them some closure. And his life is not what it once was. His life is a mess now because so many people know what he did.
That's good. That's great. People who do bad things there should be something that go against them, not
Well,
just
for him, he's pretending to be grandfather to a bunch of other little girls, and I'm thinking, are you kidding? Do you guys know what this man did to my sisters?
mm,
What do you think he possibly have done to these little girls here in this church? Come on.
there's
So
probably other victims out there. So yeah,
yeah, I write about all of it in the book, all of it, and ultimately, Dominic, it's so my family story doesn't need to end in tragedy. It can be used to help and educate other families. That's what's really going on here. We want to help.
that's it. Thank you. Well, for everyone out there, I put his website on this link right here. You can see it, keepercatrinwhitney.com. You can find his book on amazon.com as well. Find it, get it, and read it, and take it into experience that you never had, and you can understand how to share it with others and help others along the way. It might be your own family as well, and people hiding it, problems in your own family that you can learn from it as well. And for guys out there, for students as well, my students, you're a boy, don't be afraid, share your emotions. If there are problems out there, talk to teachers. If there are teachers that you can help, there are counseling teachers as well. Go to them, or go to your parents, or go to your uncles or aunts, or someone that you can trust, or someone you can talk to. I believe that's one way to do it. Talking to peers, I don't think that's the best way sometimes, but if you have no choice, th- there's one way to go too. And well, Keeper, do you have any last message to everyone out there, or especially to younger generations who are experiencing this right now, the same things, and how can they get about with it?
Well, I would certainly agree with you. The best thing that you can do is talk to someone that you trust that will allow you to speak. As in our case, because my book centers around what happens in the home, you might not be able to find your parents as a resource, but there are people. There might be someone in your church. There might be someone like you, a teacher or an instructor, because teachers, this type of conversation is not foreign to them if they've been around for any length of time. They have heard plenty of stories like this. So they're oftentimes a very good resource, a very good place to talk and find someone to talk to. At the end of the day, male, female, brother, or sister, we all want the same things, no matter what kind of trauma you are going through. You want to be seen, you want to be heard, you want to be understood, and you want to be able to go through life in a very productive, positive way. And a lot of that cannot happen until you begin to recognize your trauma and then take the steps necessary to heal. It's not easy. None of this is easy and it never goes away. You learn how to handle and manage it. When you are able to do that, you're on your way to being a much happier person.
Thank you, keeper. That is true, guys. We have sad things in our life or whatever happens. Share it. Get it out. It's a step to being happier you. Happy you. That's it. Be a
Hmm.
better you. Thank you again, keeper. Thank you everyone for coming to the show, and I wish everyone have a good night and goodbye.